When Delores Jordan pushed through the revolving door of the Velvet Room restaurant, time seemed to stop. As she entered, she felt all eyes turned to her, even though no one said a word. People accustomed to power, money, exclusivity. But Delores didn't belong there. She carried in her eyes the pain and dignity of someone who had fought and won many battles. Battles these patrons would never know. The place was a scene of absolute luxury, reserved for a few, reflecting dreams and vanity all along Michigan Avenue. Delores wore a burgundy dress, simple but clean. Her short, well-combed hair had silver strands that shimmered under the lights. She carried a small purse, a little worn at the edges. Her black low-heeled shoes were polished to a shine, though they had seen many roads. She walked toward the reception. Each step echoed loudly on the marble floor. Each heel strike seemed to betray her racing heart. She felt the heat rising to her face, but she did not retreat. She approached the maitre d's podium, a tall man in a flawless black suit, cold blue eyes, and a porcelain smile. The gold nameplate gleamed on his chest. Richard. Richard didn't smile. His eyes swept from Dolores's head to her feet, lingering on her shoes, then her purse. He pressed his lips together and inhaled deeply, as if the air in the restaurant had suddenly become heavy. For a moment, he glanced back at the crowded dining room, then back at Delores. "Good evening," Delores said in a soft yet powerful voice. "I have a reservation, under the name Delores Jordan." Richard raised an eyebrow. He typed slowly on the tablet in front of him, never taking his eyes off her. Behind him, a young red-headed waitress bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable. Delores noticed that, unlike for other guests, no one rushed to greet her. In the background, muffled laughter. A blonde woman whispered to her husband and discreetly pointed. Richard paused, crossed his arms. "Are you sure you're at the right restaurant, madam?" The blow was sharp. Delores felt her chest tighten, but kept her chin high. "Yes, my son made the reservation for tonight. The name is Delores Jordan." The maitre d' typed something again, slower this time, as if challenging every letter. The discomfort grew sharp and cold, and no one intervened. Delores felt the hairs on her arms stand up. A couple entered behind her and was immediately greeted with smiles and clinking glasses. She was ignored. "I'm sorry," Richard said, lowering his voice. "There must be a mistake. We have many special guests tonight." Delores noticed he hadn't really checked anything. It was just the usual game. The doubt, the disdain, the push away without ever saying the forbidden word. She stood still, feeling the restaurant's gaze burning into her dark skin. An uncomfortable silence took over the room. Every second made it harder to breathe. Across the lobby, the red-headed waitress, Amy, took a small step toward her, but Richard stopped her with a sharp look. "Return to the floor, Amy," he said under his breath, but firmly. Amy bit her lip and walked back to the tables, her face burning with shame. Delores inhaled slowly, fighting back tears. She had felt this before. When as a young girl they tried to kick her out of a cafe, when she couldn't sit at the front of a bus, when she held her children tightly after strangers shouted insults at them on the street. She closed her eyes for a second and thought of Michael, her son, the boy she had taught never to lower his head. "I have a reservation. I would like to be treated like any other guest," she said, her voice stronger than she felt inside. Richard gave a cold half-smile and subtly turned the tablet away so no one else could see it. "Unfortunately, I don't see your name here, madam, but I can suggest another restaurant, more welcoming, just a few blocks away. It might be more comfortable for you." The impact was brutal. Delores felt her knees weaken but gripped the counter tightly. The entire restaurant was silent. The humiliation hit like a punch. Silent but leaving the taste of iron in her mouth. She looked around. No one defended her. No one lifted a finger. In the back of the room, a black man in a light-colored suit watched the scene unfold. He gripped his wine glass tightly, his eyes welling with restrained anger. But he didn't move. Delores breathed in deeply, feeling her chest burn. "Thank you for your kindness," she said, her voice trembling but unyielding. "I'll wait right here. I'm sure my reservation is there." Richard sighed, annoyed, and whispered something in Amy's ear, now back by his side. She widened her eyes in surprise but said nothing. She simply looked at Delores with pity and guilt. Please wait a moment, the maitre d' said, before quickly walking away, whispering to Amy, keep an eye on her, don't let her disturb the other guests. Dolores's eyes shone, not with tears but with an ancient deep pain. The room slowly returned to normal, conversations resumed, but everything had changed. Delores standing alone, facing a crowd that chose to look the other way. Amy, the waitress, returned and placed a glass of water at the reception desk, leaning in nervously, her eyes filled with compassion. Ma'am, don't leave. There's something you need to know. At that moment, Richard threw a severe look her way, but Amy stood firm. Your table is ready. Right this way, please. Delores followed Amy to a discreet table in the corner. The restaurant watched her, some with disdain, others with curiosity. She sat down, adjusted her dress, feeling the heavy stares. Amy quickly stepped away, leaving Delores alone in the spotlight of indifference. Delores was finally seated, but she realized everyone around her acted as if she didn't exist, and something even worse was about to happen. Her table was near the window. The restaurant's lighting was soft, but nothing could warm the cold spreading through her chest. She arranged the napkin on her lap, observing her trembling hands against the white tablecloth. Her heart raced, but her face remained calm, hiding the storm within. Behind the elegance, she was just another woman trying to exist, to be seen, to be respected. And in that moment, it felt impossible. Across the room, waiters glided by quickly. They smiled at couples, handed out menus, poured wine with effortless grace. The laughter was light, the clinking glasses almost like music. No one looked at Delores. No smile, no welcoming gesture. It was as if her table were invisible, a void in the middle of luxury. She searched every staff member's eyes for a sign of humanity, but all she saw was hurry and indifference. They passed so close she could smell their strong perfume, but none of them stopped. A drop of sweat slid down her forehead. Time dragged on, dragging the shame with it like a heavy chain. Next to her, an elderly couple received their menu with smiles. The waiter, David, leaned in, complimented the lady's necklace, made a joke about Chicago's cold weather. His smile was sincere. Delores closed her eyes, squeezing her fingers tightly in her lap. Be strong, she whispered softly to herself. Just one more minute. Don't give up. The stomach rumbled softly. Delores hadn't eaten since breakfast, but her hunger was smaller than her need to be treated with dignity. She glanced at the clock. 8 minutes since she sat down. No one had brought water. No one had even asked her name. The silence around her was heavy, almost cruel. The laughter from other tables now sounded like mockery. Amy, the red-haired waitress, rushed by twice, carrying steaming plates to a table of 4 white executives. She glanced at Delores, her look brief and full of guilt, but kept moving without stopping. Delores realized that all the staff were avoiding her gaze. It was as if she didn't belong there, as if she was trespassing in a place never meant for her. The old, too familiar feeling of exclusion tightened in her chest. Tears threatened to come, but she held them back. Not now, not again. At the table beside hers, a group of white women clinked glasses and laughed loudly. The waiter pulled out a chair for one of them, complimenting her dress. "What a pleasure to have you with us tonight, Mrs. Harper," he said, smiling warmly. Delores bit her lip hard. The sound of courtesy and care felt distant. She wanted to get up and leave, but she stayed, sitting tall because she had endured worse humiliations. The entire restaurant seemed to conspire to make her vanish. The door opened, and a blonde white woman entered briskly. She wore a light-colored coat, a pricey leather purse, and a sweet perfume. The maitre d' rushed to her, beaming. "Welcome, Mrs. Simmons. We have a perfect table for you." "Thank you, Richard." Her tone was warm, intimate, like old friends. The woman passed right by Delores, treating her like part of the furniture. Richard led Mrs. Simmons to a table identical to Dolores's. The moment she sat down, 2 waiters appeared instantly, offering water, wine, and the chef's special menu. Delores clenched her fists under the table. Blood throbbed in her ears. She looked around, hoping maybe that someone would notice. But everyone kept smiling, serving, celebrating. Amy approached, her face pale. She placed a glass of water softly in front of Delores. Her eyes were sad, anxious. "Sorry for the wait, ma'am." Her voice was a whisper, almost a silent cry for help. "I'll be right back with the menu." Delores smiled, trying to forgive, but she knew Amy was just another pawn in this ancient theater of exclusion and inequality. The power wasn't in her hands. The next minutes felt like hours. Delores, sitting alone, was ignored while waiters tended to everyone else with wide smiles. The world kept spinning, except for her. At the table next to hers, Mrs. Simmons was already chatting with the sommelier. The wine was served with reverence, the menu presented with pride. Delores felt her stomach churn. It was living proof that for some, respect was a right, for others a favor, rarely granted. She looked down at her hands, now trembling slightly, a knot in her throat. She wanted to cry but took a deep breath. Amy passed by again, her eyes glistening. She dropped a napkin near Delores, pretending it was by accident. As she bent down to pick it up, she whispered, "It's not personal. They asked us not to give you attention." Delores felt the world collapse for a second. It was official. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't paranoia. It was racism. Pure, raw, blatant, painful, real. A waiter approached Mrs. Simmons' table, presenting a beautiful, colorful dish within minutes. Delores, still waiting, was the living portrait of pain and dignity. She looked outside, watching cars pass by, the Chicago lights so close, yet so distant. Time seemed frozen at that forgotten corner table. Delores could feel the stares slicing into her skin, like tiny knives of disdain, each colder than the freezing air conditioning. The water glass before her was nearly empty, but no one asked if she wanted more. The waiter passed by the other table smiling, as if she didn't exist. She straightened her back, placed her purse beside her, and adjusted her dress. Inside, her chest ached, but her face remained lifted, showing the world she would not break easily. Across the room, Amy exchanged nervous glances with Delores but seemed closely watched by Richard. Then he approached, finally. Richard, the maître d', walked slowly, measured steps, his expression carefully neutral to keep control of the situation. When he stopped by the table, he didn't smile. He simply nodded slightly, too polite to be hostile, too cold to be welcoming. "Good evening again, ma'am." His voice was as cold as the marble beneath Dolores's feet. She lifted her eyes, steady, though inside them raged a storm. "I would like to see the full menu, please," she asked politely, but with a tone that demanded respect. Richard didn't hurry. Instead of fetching the regular menu, he pulled out a smaller pamphlet, made of cheap paper, almost a caricature compared to the leather-bound menus at other tables. He placed it slowly in front of her. "Here's our budget menu," he said, barely hiding his condescension. "More affordable options, simple and quick. I believe you may find it suitable." The words hung in the air, heavy, impossible to ignore. Delores felt the blood drain from her face. The insult was there, plain as day, but she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. She kept her gaze firm, but her hands crushed the napkin until her knuckles turned white. "I'd prefer to see the main menu if you don't mind," she said with a delicate smile, though her voice wavered slightly underneath. Richard feigned surprise, looked around, then back at Delores. "Our establishment usually serves a very selective clientele, Mrs. Jordan." The emphasis on selective was a slap in the face. "Perhaps this isn't exactly what you're looking for tonight." The silence between them was made of shattered glass. Delores took a deep breath, her eyes welling up, but she didn't allow the tears to fall. She remembered her childhood, the closed doors, the times her skin color decided where she could or couldn't be. The entire restaurant seemed to lean in to listen. Some customers threw her side eyes, pretending not to see. Others exchanged complicit glances, pleased that the natural order was being maintained. Amy, the waitress, watched from afar, restless, her hands clenched behind her back. Delores tried to swallow the lump in her throat. She looked at the cheap menu, then back at Richard, with the calmness of someone who had faced far greater storms. "My son insisted on this place. He spoke very highly of the Velvet Room," she said, tenderness in her voice, but a spark of challenge too. "I'd like to try the best dish you have." "The best dish?" Richard repeated, almost laughing. It's quite expensive, ma'am. I could suggest the grilled chicken from the budget menu. It's simple but satisfying. I don't need it to be simple. I just need it to be respectful. As you wish, madam, I can provide the traditional menu, but I ask for your understanding. The kitchen might take some time. After all, we have many important guests tonight. Delores did not yield. She held her pain with all the dignity she had left. I'll wait, she replied softly but firmly. I've waited too long for respect to give up now. Richard stared at her for a few seconds, perhaps expecting her to give up, to lower herself, to retreat. But Delores remained seated, as upright and silent as an ancient mountain, standing firm against the storm. He slowly stepped away, leaving the cheap menu on the table. His expensive cologne faded from the air, replaced by the bitter scent of injustice, exclusion, and old wounds reopened. Delores picked up the plain menu but set it aside. She kept her hands clasped on the table, her gaze lost in the window, where Chicago's night seemed even colder. She could feel the tears trying to surface, but she smiled. A polite smile filled with the strength of someone who had survived far worse. Yet behind that smile, her eyes shimmered with the sadness of a lifetime of battles. Amy approached slowly, sensing the heavy atmosphere. She placed the traditional menu on the table gently and whispered, looking deep into Dolores's eyes, "Ma'am, don't give up. They're wrong, but something is happening in the kitchen." Amy's look carried both fear and hope. Delores' eyes widened, a new anxiety swelling in her chest. Amy had to leave quickly, and Delores was left longing for more information. At the back of the dining room, Richard whispered something into the chef's ear, who immediately turned his cold gaze toward Delores. What were they preparing for her? The restaurant felt even colder that night. Delores could feel the weight of exclusion in every detail. The waiter who avoided her eyes, the waitress who hurried past pretending not to see her, the maitre d' who now beamed at other customers while keeping one wary eye on her. While Delores waited, resting her hands on the table, two waiters gathered near the kitchen entrance. They spoke in hushed tones, but in places like this, certain words are too heavy to be completely silenced. The first waiter, Josh, was young, with close-cropped blonde hair and an always immaculate uniform. The other, Mark, older, with a thick mustache and a sarcastic glint in his eye, carried an empty tray like a trophy. Josh leaned in, casting a disguised glance at Delores. "What is she doing here?" he whispered mockingly. "Must have gotten lost from the diner down the street." Mark chuckled lowly, almost inaudible, but his laugh was cruel. "Bet she'll order tap water and split a roll," he muttered, mocking. "They're all the same, always thinking they can walk in wherever they want." The two laughed together, a low, venomous laughter that spread through the corner like a foul smell. Delores, seated, couldn't hear the words, but she felt the weight of their stares, the bitter taste of contempt lingering in the air. She knew. It wasn't her first time. It never is. Prejudice, no matter how much they tried to hide it, always found a way to surface. Josh couldn't hold his tongue. Bet she'll complain later that she wasn't treated right. They love playing the victim. Mark nodded knowingly. Yeah, always the same drama. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the clinking of dishes in the kitchen and the muffled murmur of conversations in the background. Across the room, a tall black customer in a light gray suit observed attentively. His name was Charles. He was dining with his wife, Linda, but as he noticed what was happening, he grew silent. Charles's eyes stayed locked on the waiters. He saw when they laughed, when they looked sideways at Delores. He saw everything. And he felt the familiar knot of indignation tighten in his chest. Linda noticed her husband's unrest. "What's wrong, Charles?" He shook his head, looking at her with sadness. "I know that look. I know that laugh." Linda squeezed his hand, understanding without needing an explanation. At her table, Delores adjusted her napkin, trying to shake off the sting of humiliation. She didn't hear the words, but she felt the poison. The restaurant seemed to conspire to make her disappear, to force her to leave. The smell of the food, once so inviting, now turned her stomach. The waiters returned to the dining room, pretending everything was normal. Josh stopped by a nearby table pouring wine for Mrs. Simmons, a newly arrived white customer, his voice sweet and polished. "Would you like any side dishes, ma'am?" She smiled, oblivious, while injustice passed right before her, a shadow no one dared acknowledge. Mark walked past Delores, paused briefly, and lowered the tray near her head. He whispered, almost like a warning, "If you need anything, just raise your hand." The tone was mocking, the expression pure disdain. Delores felt the urge to disappear, but she couldn't. Not now. She remembered Michael and how she had taught him from a young age to never bow his head. She swallowed her tears, lifted her chin, and breathed deeply. Amy, watching from a distance, could feel the tension. Her eyes gleamed with shame and compassion. Charles stayed alert. He saw it all. The whispers, the laughter, the scorn. For a moment, he thought about standing up, about saying something, but the weight of decades of silenced racism was heavy. He knew the risks. He knew the pain. But seeing Delores, he realized he had to do something, even if it was small. He leaned towards Linda, speaking softly. "They're crossing the line." Linda nodded, eyes moist. "She's not alone, Charles." "You're not alone." The atmosphere grew heavier. The smell of injustice was almost tangible. Delores looked around, searching for any comfort. The silence was sharp, but she refused to cry. She would not give them that pleasure. Instead, she kept her eyes firmly on the kitchen door, where the waiters still exchanged malicious glances. Those who have never lived through it might never understand how much it hurts to be treated as less, just for existing. Charles took out his phone and discreetly started recording. His look now was one of defiance, of protection. He whispered to Linda, "Enough. I won't let this slide." At that moment, Richard, the maitre d', noticed the movement and shot a threatening look at Charles, as if to say, "Careful." What was Charles about to do? What was Richard willing to do to maintain silence? The night was about to turn into a battleground. The atmosphere inside the restaurant had shifted completely. The air was thick with something no one wanted to name. Delores felt every glance, every stifled laugh, every poisonous word floating over her table like a dark cloud. Yet she remained firm, determined not to back down. Amy had placed the traditional menu in front of her. The dark leather gleamed under the light, the golden letters shining elegantly. Delores opened the menu with steady hands, despite her racing heart. Her eyes scanned through the restaurant's most famous dishes. There were plates listed there she had never imagined ordering, prices that would make many hesitate, but tonight belonged to her. In the background, Charles continued recording with his phone, discreet, attentive to every gesture in the room. He knew that something important was about to happen. Richard, the maitre d', returned to the table with a fake smile, as cold as the wind outside. He glanced briefly at the menu, then at Delores. "Have you decided, madam?" he asked, his tone dragging as if speaking to a child or a problem. Delores raised her eyes and stared firmly at Richard. "Yes, I've decided. I would like the house's special filet mignon with white truffle sauce," she said. Her voice was sweet, but filled with dignity. Silence fell over the table. Richard took a second to respond. The room for a moment seemed to catch the moment, as if the air had been sucked out of the atmosphere. The laughter quieted. Curious glances turned to the scene. Richard cleared his throat, trying to maintain control. The mockery, however, was not easy to hide. "The special filet mignon, madam," he repeated, exaggerating each syllable. "It's one of the most expensive dishes on our menu. Are you sure this is what you want to order? Perhaps the dish of the day might be more appropriate." He smiled, a barely concealed look of contempt. Delores kept her posture. She felt the anger wanting to overflow, but she took a deep breath. She wouldn't let herself be shaken. Not again. "I'm sure of what I want. The special filet mignon, please." She pronounced each word as if drawing a line on the floor. A limit. "And please bring the wine recommended by the chef. I want everything exactly as it's written on the menu." Richard raised an eyebrow. The provocation had been made. The room was attentive, whispers now more evident. Charles, in the background, clenched his fist lightly on the table, admiring Dolores's courage. The maître, seeing that his strategy had failed, took a step back. He smiled, but the smile lacked warmth. "As you wish, madam. But I must warn you." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only Delores could hear. Aber, there have been customers who tried to order dishes like that and had trouble paying afterward. He let out a low chuckle. Indignation burned in Dolores's chest, but she kept calm, not losing the sparkle of dignity in her eyes. You don't need to worry. I can pay every cent. And if needed, my son can cover the bill. Her tone was calm, but there was a silent challenge in it. Amy, across the room, saw the whole scene and felt her eyes fill with tears. It was unfair, it was revolting, but it was also beautiful to see someone so firm, so proud, refuse to lower her head. Richard straightened up, adjusting his suit. Very well, he said, almost growling. One moment, madam. He hurried off, muttering something under his breath. Delores remained seated, her whole body tense, but her face serene. The conversation at Charles' table was interrupted. Linda looked at her husband. She's brave, Charles. He nodded, moved. She's teaching everyone here what dignity is. At the next table, Mrs. Simmons glanced briefly. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but something in Dolores's posture caught her attention. For the first time, she really looked at her. She saw the strength, she saw the pain, and she felt an unease in her chest, as if she too was being judged. Delores, now alone, felt her hands trembling. She remembered her childhood, the times her mother told her never to accept scraps, to fight for respect. She remembered Michael, how he always made her feel proud, how his success was the living proof of her strength. The silence was almost sacred when Richard returned, accompanied by the chef, a tall man in a white coat with a closed face. The chef looked Delores up and down, not hiding his disdain. Confirming the order, special filet mignon with white truffle sauce, house wine. The chef spoke dryly, writing it down in his notepad. Exactly, Delores replied, her head held high. The chef turned to Richard, whispering something inaudible. Richard just nodded. For a second, the entire restaurant was silent. Even the cutlery stopped. Everyone was attentive, curious, tense. It was as if, at that moment, everyone was waiting to see if Delores would truly be allowed to occupy that space. When the maitre d' and the chef walked away, Amy quickly approached, nervous. She leaned in and whispered, her voice trembling. Madam, I need to warn you. There's something wrong in the kitchen. They won't let this slide. Delores' gaze hardened. In the background, Charles discreetly stood up, ready to intervene if something happened. The restaurant's silence cut through Delores like a cold blade. After ordering the most expensive dish, she felt the stares weighing on her like stones thrown by invisible hands. The maître had disappeared to the kitchen with the chef. Amy was restless. Charles was recording from afar, attentive. But at that moment, Delores was alone. She placed her hands on the table, intertwining her fingers, slender and marked by time. She looked outside, the lights of Chicago reflected in the glass, distant and unreachable. A tear stubbornly tried to form in the corner of her eye, but she didn't allow it. She had cried too much over situations like this. Now it was different. Now she needed to remember who she was. The memory came like a bitter gust. Delores was 7 when she was kicked out of a bakery, because this is not a place for people like you. Her mother held her hand tightly and walked down the street, head held high, but her eyes wet. At 17, Delores was turned down for her first receptionist job. The manager smiled, polite, saying that the position had already been filled. When she left, she saw another white girl walking in, receiving the same smile. But for her, the job was offered immediately. The years passed, doors kept closing. College, buses, hospitals, even banks. Come back another time, ma'am. We have no vacancies. Maybe somewhere else. Delores collected rejections like others collect family pictures. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the injustices marked on her skin and soul. In her youth, the pain came like a storm. Now it hurt like a wound that never healed. The voices of the past echoed, harsh, dirty, persistent. People of your color don't sit here. We can't accept your application. You don't belong in this place. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to be carried away by discouragement. She wanted to get up, apologize, disappear. But then she remembered her children. She remembered Michael, the boy who dreamed big, who dribbled poverty and prejudice with the ball in his hand, and a smile on his face. "Don't lower your head, Mom," he would say. "If they don't want to see you, make them look." Dolores smiled inside. That was it. Every time a door closed, she created a new entrance. With struggle, with pain, with dignity. She lifted her gaze, stared at her own reflection in the window. She saw a woman who had survived everything. She saw the mother who raised children alone, who educated, fed, and protected. She saw the grandmother who told stories of overcoming, teaching her grandchildren never to be silent in the face of racism. In the background, she again felt the low laughs of the waiters, words spoken to hurt, looks trying to diminish her. But Dolores now was not going to stay silent. She applied a subtle lipstick, fixed her hair, and straightened her back. One of the waitresses hurried by, glancing sideways at Dolores, almost pitying her. The smell of the food, once delightful, now seemed distant. Her stomach growled, but the hunger was different. It was hunger for respect, hunger to be seen as an equal. She thought of so many other Black women across the country, living silent battles in places like this. She thought of the words she never said, the responses she swallowed to avoid a fight. But today would be different. Today I'm not going to stay silent, she thought. Amy from a distance watched Dolores, silently rooting for her. Charles, with his phone, didn't miss a detail. Then amidst the clinking of cutlery and muffled conversations, something changed. Dolores's phone, tucked in her purse, vibrated. The screen lit up discreetly. Michael Jordan. Her heart skipped a beat. It was her son, the boy who had become a giant, the man who had never allowed his mother to be invisible. She took the phone with trembling hands, hesitating for a moment. Around her, no one seemed to notice. But to Dolores, that moment was sacred. She pressed the button to answer. "Hello, Mom." Michael's voice was warm, strong, unmistakable. Dolores swallowed the sob. "Hi, darling. I called to wish you a happy birthday. Have you ordered that dish you wanted so much? Are you feeling like a queen over there?" Dolores looked around the room, took a deep breath, and for the first time that night felt her chest fill with hope. Would she tell him everything? Would she hide it? The doubt burned. But Michael, on the other end of the line, seemed to sense the tension. "Is everything okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice now lower, more attentive. "What's going on over there?" Dolores stayed silent for a second. The restaurant, the laughter, the stares, everything became distant. There was only her and her son's voice. It was her chance to finally speak up. It was her chance, for the first time, to ask for help and show the world what true strength is. Before she could answer, Dolores noticed Richard, the maître, watching her, speaking on the phone, and staring at her with a hard expression, as if preparing a new strike. On the other side of the line, Michael insisted, "Mom, if something happened, tell me now." Dolores took a deep breath, looked at Amy, saw Charles standing, still recording with his phone. For the first time in a long time, she felt she was not alone. But she knew that if she decided to tell the truth, nothing would ever be the same. The night was about to change, and her whole life too. Dolores held the phone with both hands as if it were a lifeline in a sea of disregard. Her face, once calm, now showed small cracks of emotion. Michael's words, even from afar, seemed to embrace her in the middle of that cold hall. "Mom, are you there?" "I'm here, darling," Dolores answered softly, trying to keep her voice steady without revealing what she truly felt. "Tell me, how's the night? Are you liking the place?" Michael's voice had joy in it, but also that tinge of worry only a child feels when their mother suffers in silence. Dolores looked around. The waiters were serving other tables with wide smiles, but all she got was indifference. Charles, with his phone in hand, was still recording discreetly. Amy moved between the tables, but from time to time, exchanged looks of encouragement. She hesitated before speaking. She wanted to protect Michael, not ruin his day. But her throat tightened, begging for someone to hear, even if secretly. It was at that moment, while Dolores spoke softly with her son, that Richard the maître returned from the kitchen counter. He walked slowly, his steps heavy on the floor, pretending not to care. As he passed near the table, he heard the deep voice on the other end of the line. "Michael Jordan," Dolores murmured without thinking, as she answered a question from her son about how the reservation was showing up in the system. The mate paused for a moment, his eyebrows arching ever so slightly. A flicker of suspicion crossed his gaze. He stared at Delores with renewed attention, as if searching for a missing piece of a puzzle. Richard wasn't a fan of basketball, but that name echoed even through the walls of Chicago. Michael Jordan was synonymous with greatness, power, respect. Everything Richard was trying to deny Delores in that restaurant. But still, the disdain remained. He wrinkled his nose, pretending not to have heard anything noteworthy. Delores noticed the change, felt the weight of his gaze on her. She felt the old trick, trying to diminish, discredit, ignore any sign of value. She took a deep breath, trying not to cry, trying not to explode. "Mom, is everything okay?" Michael kept asking on the other end. Delores squeezed her eyes shut, holding back the tears. She lowered her voice even more, as if revealing a secret just for him. "Today they made me remember the past, son." Michael stayed silent for a few seconds. Delores could almost hear his heart beating on the other side of the line. "What past, Mom?" She closed her eyes and let the memories speak louder. "The time when they only let us enter through the back door, when they looked at me as if I was nothing. It's strange. We fight so much thinking the world has changed, but sometimes everything comes back in a second." Michael's silence was heavy, filled with unasked questions. On the other side of the hall, Charles sensed the shift and gripped his phone tighter, feeling he was witnessing something bigger than anyone there could imagine. Amy, from a distance, saw Delores on the phone, her trembling hands, and went on alert. Richard circled near the table again, this time less confident, uneasy. Maybe he was finally starting to realize that this lady was not just anyone, but still the disdain remained, now mixed with a silent fear that he might have gone too far. Delores wiped away a tear, disguising it with a smile. "But I'm not alone," she whispered to Michael. "You taught me never to stay silent." On the phone, Michael sighed. "Mom, do you want me to come there?" She smiled, touched, watching Richard and the waiter's strange movements. "No, darling. I don't want trouble. I just want respect. I just want to be able to celebrate my birthday without feeling ashamed of who I am." At the back of the restaurant, people began to notice something was wrong. The silence around Delores' table had become uncomfortable. Some customers watched, others pretended not to see. Suddenly, Richard discreetly called over one of the waiters and whispered something in his ear, casting a nervous glance at Delores. The waiter nodded and quickly disappeared into the kitchen. Delores noticed. The danger was close. She knew that when someone's dignity threatens the power of the little kings, they tend to retaliate. But now she wasn't backing down. "I love you, Mom," Michael said, his voice choked with emotion. "I love you too, son." She hung up, took a deep breath, wiped away the last tear before it could fall. The whole room seemed to be holding its breath. Amy approached, eyes wide. She leaned in and whispered, panicked, "Ma'am, they're planning something bad with your dish. Please be careful." At the same time, Richard returned to the table, his face serious, a shadow in his eyes. The tension exploded in the air. What was about to happen? Would Delores be humiliated again, or was something even bigger coming? The story had no turning back, and no one was ready for what was coming. The silence weighed like a stone on Delores' table. The room, once loud and cheerful, now seemed to hold its breath, waiting for an outcome. Amy watched from afar, her hands sweating, her eyes glowing with anxiety and compassion. She knew she was risking her job, but she could no longer sit silently while they were doing this. Delores, alone, looked at the empty glass, her fingers slightly trembling. Michael's phone call echoed in her mind. Amy's words whispered urgently, "They're planning something bad with your dish. Please be careful," hammered incessantly in her chest. There was fear, but also a strange peace, as if, for the first time, she wasn't completely alone. Amy took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and walked over to Delores' table. With each step, she could feel Richard's cold gaze, the mater burning into her back. Still, she pressed on. When she reached her, she smiled for real, a shy but empathetic smile. "Mrs. Jordan, I'm so sorry." Amy's voice trembled, but it was sincere. "I'm sorry for everything that's happening. This isn't right. It's not fair." Delores looked at the young woman, surprised. For a moment she forgot the room, the low laughter, the whispers. All that mattered was the sincere face in front of her. "Thank you, dear," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. "You don't need to apologize for them. I've been through a lot in my life. She gestured around her with a tired smile. "This isn't new, but it still hurts." Amy nodded, her eyes filling with tears. No one should be treated like this. She pulled up a chair, sat next to Delores, ignoring the restaurant's rules. "I saw what they did. I saw what they said. You deserve respect. You deserve to be celebrated, not humiliated." Delores held Amy's hand on the table, squeezing it gently. "You're brave, girl. Don't lose that." "I'm afraid of losing my job," Amy admitted, whispering. "But I'm more afraid of becoming like them, of thinking it's normal to treat someone like that." For a moment, time stopped. Two generations united by pain, by indignation, by the hope for a different world. Amy discreetly wiped away a tear and stood up, grabbing a bottle of cold water. She filled Delores' glass, this time with care and affection, as if serving a queen. "Here you go, Mrs. Jordan." This time her smile was wide, genuine, full of humanity. Delores returned the smile, her eyes wet. "You've done more for me tonight than you'll ever know." The gesture didn't go unnoticed. At the back of the room, Richard watched everything, his eyes narrowing, anger growing. He whispered something to the manager, a robust man in a dark suit named Thomas. Thomas nodded and walked over to Amy, who had just said goodbye to Delores. "Amy, please come with me," he said, his voice dry, emotionless. Amy turned pale. She looked at Delores, who simply nodded, as if saying, "Stay strong." Amy followed Thomas to the back of the room. They passed through the narrow hallway between the full tables until they disappeared behind a frosted glass door into the manager's room. At Delores' table, the atmosphere was one of complete suspense. Charles in the back stopped recording for a moment, his face tense. Linda beside him whispered, "They're going to punish her." Charles shook his head indignant. "They'll try, but I won't let it happen without witnessing it." Across the room, Richard approached Delores, this time without a mask. His eyes were cold, his posture stiff. "I hope you're satisfied, madame," he said, the venom hidden under a veneer of politeness. "If there's anything else you'd like to complain about, you can speak to management. We'll handle everything our way." Delores simply looked him in the eyes, not blinking. "I just want respect, and for the truth to come out, that's all." Richard smiled smugly, but his hand trembled as he adjusted his suit. "Sometimes those who cause trouble here end up regretting it. Just a piece of advice." His gaze was a veiled threat, but Delores didn't flinch. She had survived worse. She had the strength of an entire history, of all the women who came before her. The room, once entirely Richard's, now was filled with suspense, fear, and silent courage. The tension was in the air, thick as smoke. Everyone felt that something was about to change forever. The manager's room door opened forcefully. Amy stepped out, her head down, her eyes red from crying. Thomas appeared right behind her, furious, and went straight to Delores. "Mrs. Jordan, I need you to come with me to management. Now." Delores slowly got up, feeling every gaze in the restaurant on her. Charles from afar began filming again. Amy tried to intervene, but Thomas grabbed her firmly. What were they going to do to Delores? Would she be thrown out? Humiliated? Or was it now that the truth would finally come to light? Delores was still standing next to Thomas, feeling every eye in the restaurant on her. The call for management echoed like a threat, but she walked with her head held high, slow steps, dignity intact. Amy, the waitress, stayed behind, but threw one last brave glance at Delores. Charles, still with his phone in hand, moved discreetly, ready to record any injustice. Thomas led Delores back to a more visible table, as if to show the entire room where she belongs. The customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The quiet murmur grew in waves. Some whispered indignantly. Others just watched, embarrassed to be silently part of this scene. Delores sat calmly. With each passing second, she felt the atmosphere shift around her. What had once been indifference was now transforming into solidarity and collective shame. At the table next to hers, A woman with white hair whispered, "This isn't right, Harold. She just wanted to have dinner in peace." Harold nodded, his face serious. "And to think that in the 21st century, we still see this happening." In the back, Mrs. Simmons, the elegant customer, stopped eating and stared, her fork suspended in the air. For the first time, she realized how painful silence can be. The waiter Josh crossed the room, eyes on the ground. Mark, who had laughed at the cruel jokes before, now avoided looking at Delores. He felt the weight of shame. The glances started multiplying. An elderly man, a war veteran, placed his hat on the table and stared at the manager, frowning. "My mother went through this her whole life. I never thought I'd see it again. Like this." The embarrassment turned into conversation. Customers whispered among themselves. Disapproving looks traveled through the room. With each passing minute, more people became aware of what was happening right before their eyes. It was as if, at that moment, the entire restaurant was being called to choose which side they would be on. Amy, restless, reappeared by Delores' side, bringing a new glass of water. Her eyes were red, but the gesture was one of courage. "Mrs. Jordan, don't give up. Please, don't let them bring you down." Delores held Amy's hand for a moment, squeezing it lightly. Her voice came out low but firm. "I won't give up, not anymore." The murmurs grew louder. Fake smiles gave way to knowing looks of compassion. A middle-aged black woman seated near the window stared at Delores with tears in her eyes. "She's doing this for all of us," she whispered to her teenage daughter. Richard, the maitre d', noticed the atmosphere. He tried to cover it up, but he was restless. He told Mark to quickly take Dolores's plate, eager to close the episode. The entire room fell silent as Mark crossed the polished floor, balancing the tray. Everyone knew this moment was crucial. Mark stopped by Dolores's table, avoided looking her in the eye, and announced in a dry voice, "Your order, madam." He placed a poorly prepared dish in front of Delores. The steak was overcooked, nearly burnt, with no sign of the special sauce or the white truffles she had ordered. Instead of the fine wine, they brought a glass of lukewarm water. The absurdity was glaring. Mrs. Simmons couldn't hold back and stood up. "This is disrespectful. She asked for the special dish, not this disgrace." Other customers began to complain, raising muffled voices. "Send it back. Treat her with respect." Thomas hurried to intervene, but there was no longer any hiding the shame. Amy, outraged, tried to approach, but Richard blocked her. Delores looked at the plate. The silence in the room was deafening. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and with dignity, raised her chin. "It's not about the food. It's about what you're truly serving here." The power of those words spread through the restaurant like a wave. Even those who had never looked at her before now saw her. At that moment, Charles stood up, his phone still recording. "Do you think this will pass quietly?" His voice was firm, determined. "It won't. Everyone will know what happened here today." Amy, crying, said, "She just wanted respect. That's all." The manager, Thomas, threatened to take Charles's phone, but several customers had already pulled their phones from their pockets, ready to record any abuse. The atmosphere was one of silent rebellion. For the first time, Delores didn't feel alone. She was the voice of many. Cliffhanger. Suddenly, a voice rose from the back of the restaurant, firm and respectful. "I want to speak to Mrs. Jordan. Now." Everyone turned to see who was calling. A well-dressed man, unfamiliar to all, walked purposefully toward Dolores's table, holding something in his hands, a sealed envelope, and a look that promised to change everything. The entire room held its breath. Who is this man? What's in the envelope? Will this finally be the turning point everyone is waiting for? Or another attempt to silence Delores? The envelope sitting in front of Delores seemed to weigh a ton. The unknown man, dressed in a dark suit, watched in silence, waiting for her reaction. Around her, the entire room stopped. Glasses suspended, mouths half open, everyone frozen in expectation and discomfort. Delores looked at the envelope, but did not open it. She felt the gaze of Amy, of Charles and Linda, of Mrs. Simmons, and of the other customers. She felt above all the weight of past generations, women like her mother, her grandmother, who had often swallowed injustice in silence. She knew she was facing a choice that would define not only that night, but perhaps the lives of many who were watching her. Inside, her soul trembled. On the outside, she kept her face serene, eyes moist but dignified. She wouldn't give in to the role they expected of her. She wasn't going to cry in silence or explode into screams of anger. This would not be forgotten, but the pain had to turn into courage. Thomas, the manager, stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Madam, if you're not satisfied, we can close your bill. Or," he threw a sideways glance at the envelope, "the gentleman here can resolve the matter privately." The suggestion was clear. Resolve it in secret. Cover it all up. Make Delores disappear from the restaurant's memory, just like so many others had before. Delores then stood up slowly. Her stature seemed to grow before everyone's eyes, as if she suddenly occupied the entire room. She placed her hands on the table and looked around. The silence was absolute. Amy, standing in the back, cried quietly. Charles raised his phone, ready to record every second. Some customers were already filming openly, aware that they were witnessing something that needed to be told. Delores cleared her throat. Her voice started low but grew stronger, cutting through the silence like lightning. "I could scream. I could walk away. I could accept this dish and pretend everything is fine, like I've done so many times in my life." She paused, looking at Thomas, at Richard, at all the surprised faces. "But today I won't bow my head. Today I choose not to accept being treated as inferior because of the color of my skin." A murmur rippled through the room. Delores looked at Amy, then at Charles, and at every face that was watching her. "I know many of you may never go through this. I know it's easier to pretend you don't see. But every time someone stays silent in the face of injustice, it grows." Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't falter. "Today I say enough, not just for me, but for every Black person who has ever walked into a place like this and been received with disdain." Thomas tried to interrupt, but Delores didn't allow it. "I don't want your private apology. I don't want the envelope. I want respect. I want equality. I want to be able to sit at a table, order a meal, and be treated like any other human being." The customers were in shock. Some, like Mrs. Simmons, cried quietly. Others lowered their eyes, ashamed of their omission. "My mother used to say that dignity has no price, that we only lose when we give up on being who we are. And today, I choose dignity." Delores took a deep breath, feeling lighter in her chest for the first time that night. The silence was broken by an unexpected sound, the click of cell phones starting to record. Charles moved closer, filming openly. Amy, with trembling hands, took her phone from her pocket and pointed it at Delores. Delores turned to everyone. "Don't accept less than respect. Never. No matter what they say, no matter how they look at you, we are all equal. And the color of our skin is a source of pride, not shame." The room exploded into a deeper silence, followed by hesitant applause, which grew louder until it became a respectful standing ovation. Richard and Thomas, pale, didn't know how to react. The man with the envelope stood still, watching with an unreadable expression. As the applause echoed, the restaurant door swung open forcefully. A tall reporter, microphone in hand, stepped inside, followed by a cameraman and other journalists. Lights flashed on. Customers turned in their chairs, pulling out phones, murmuring in surprise. Thomas, the manager, froze. His face pale, hands trembling. He tried to compose himself, but fear was evident in his eyes. Richard, the maitre d', attempted to disappear between the tables. The reporter raised the microphone, his voice firm. "Delores Jordan? I'm Steve Adams from WCN Chicago. We've received reports of racial discrimination at this restaurant. I'd like to hear your version of the events." Amy, in the back, brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes shining. Charles approached, recording everything, and even unknown customers began filming. Delores, standing, took a deep breath. The flashes went off, everyone waiting for her first move. She adjusted her dress, lifted her chin, and positioned herself in front of the cameras. Her voice, at first trembling, soon found strength. "Yes, I am Delores Jordan, and I will no longer remain silent." The reporter leaned in. "Could you tell us what happened here today?" She looked around, seeking support in Amy's gaze. Charles's, even from strangers who nodded their heads. I came to have dinner to celebrate my birthday. I just wanted a peaceful night. But from the moment I walked in, I was treated with disdain. I was offered the cheapest menu, jokes were made, and a wrong dish was deliberately served. And all of this because of the color of my skin. The emotion weighed heavily in her words. Amy was crying, Thomas didn't know where to hide his face, and Richard was trembling behind the counter. The reporter approached, sympathetic. "And what do you want now, Delores?" She lifted her eyes full of tears but also pride. "I just want respect. I want justice. I want no one else to ever go through this in any restaurant, anywhere in this country." The news team broadcasted live. Within minutes, the scene was on screens across the city. People applauded, and other customers came to hug Delores. Charles spoke loudly to the cameras. "What she did today was for all of us." The night ended under the lights of the cameras. Delores left the restaurant to applause, accompanied by Amy, Charles, Linda, and a crowd that now called her a hero. The next morning, the sun rose timidly over Chicago, but Dolores's world was already different. She woke up with a still tired face but a light heart. Her phone didn't stop vibrating. Notifications exploded, messages from strangers, friend requests, interview invitations. She got up slowly, opened the curtains, letting the light in. She looked at her phone and saw her name in the trending topics. The video from the previous night, recorded by Charles and the journalists, was everywhere. The image of her, standing before the cameras saying, "I will no longer remain silent," had already circulated the entire country. On Twitter, the hashtag Delores Jordan went viral. On Facebook, millions of shares. On WhatsApp, messages of support from Black women, elderly, young, mothers, daughters. Delores watched her own image, still not believing it. She saw herself saying, "Today I say enough." She saw the applause, Amy's tears, the pride in Charles's eyes. On Instagram, Michael Jordan posted the video with an emotional message. "My mother always taught me to never lower my head in the face of racism. Yesterday, she did it in front of the entire world. May her example inspire everyone to fight for respect. I love you, Mom." The comments exploded. "Delores, you are the voice of all of us. Thank you for your courage. Justice for Delores." Soon, newspapers across the country were covering the case. Michael Jordan's mother becomes a national symbol of dignity. Racism will not go unanswered. The restaurant, in turn, was sinking in criticism. On Google, only one-star reviews remained, angry reports, threats of boycott. Manager Thomas and Richard, the maitre d', were under investigation. Reporters surrounded them at the restaurant's door, demanding explanations. Amy called Delores, her voice choked with emotion. "They're offering me jobs elsewhere. I've never seen so much solidarity. You changed my life, Delores." Delores smiled, moved. "You changed mine too, Amy. Never lose your courage." Charles texted, "The video has over 10 million views. You've opened a door for all of us." By late afternoon, invitations from everywhere. TV shows, universities, schools, social movements. Everyone wanted to hear Delores. Everyone wanted to learn from her courage. At the end of the day, sitting on her porch, Delores took a deep breath. The sky seemed clearer. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Never be ashamed of who you are." She smiled, closed her eyes, and let the tears run, this time out of pride. Among the many messages, one stood out. An official invitation from the new owner of the restaurant for Delores to return, this time as a guest of honor, before the press in the city. The entire room would be hers. The power to transform pain into redemption was finally in her hands. The most awaited moment was approaching. Delores would have the last word. That night, Delores dressed with care. She chose a wine-colored dress, the same one from the night everything started. But now she walked differently. There was no more fear, no more insecurity, only a deep peace and the pride of someone who had faced the world with her head held high. When she arrived at the restaurant, the lights were softer. At the entrance, a red carpet and journalists waited. There were flowers on the tables, and a sense of renewal filled the air. The customers, once distant, now stood up to applaud her as she crossed the room. Amy, now in a new uniform, elegant, confident, with a genuine, open smile, ran to greet her and hugged her tightly. Welcome back, Mrs. Jordan, Amy said, emotional. Dolores looked around and felt the weight of the change. Charles and Linda were there, sitting in the front row. Mrs. Simmons clapped with tears in her eyes. Even customers who had pretended not to see her now looked at her with respect and admiration. In the center of the room, a small stage had been set up. The new owner, a calm-eyed man with firm hands, took the microphone. This house, starting today, is a place of respect, dignity, and inclusion. He looked at Dolores, then at everyone. And there is no one more important to inaugurate this new era than the woman who showed us the true meaning of courage. Richard, the former maître, wore the same black suit, but his face was different. There was humility in his gaze and a sadness of regret. He approached, stopped in front of Dolores, lowered his head, and with a trembling voice, spoke loudly for everyone to hear. Mrs. Jordan, I want to apologize. What I did was unforgivable. You taught me in the most painful way that respect is not measured by color or appearance, but by humanity. He swallowed his tears. I hope one day to be worthy of forgiveness. The room fell silent. Dolores touched Richard's arm, looked deeply into his eyes, and replied, Forgiveness begins with the recognition of the wrong. May your apology serve as an example. Let no one here forget the power that every word has to hurt or heal. The applause exploded. Amy was crying, smiling. The microphone was handed to Dolores. She walked slowly onto the stage, feeling every gaze, every heart open to hear her. She looked at everyone, her voice trembling but strong. I didn't come back here to receive flowers. I came back because I believe no one should be humiliated for being who they are. Dignity is the greatest treasure we have, and it cannot be stolen by looks, harsh words, or silence. She paused, staring at the audience. If my mother were here, she would say that our strength lies in what we endure in silence. But the true victory comes when finally we make ourselves heard. Amy, in the back, held the hand of a colleague. The new owner smiled proudly. Customers wiped away tears. Dolores continued, her voice firm, looking at every face, from the young to the elderly. I don't want anyone else to enter this restaurant feeling fear, shame, or loneliness. From now on, let this place be an example of respect, inclusion, and humanity. Let everyone here be treated like family, regardless of color, age, or appearance. The entire room stood and applauded. Even Richard, in tears, bowed in respect. The new owner then announced, from today on, clear inclusion policies, mandatory training for all staff, and in recognition of her courage, Amy, our waitress, is promoted to dining room manager. Applause once again. Amy, surprised, hugged Dolores, who smiled broadly. Dolores stepped down from the stage, surrounded by hugs, thanks, photos, and autograph requests. But she only wanted one thing, peace in her heart. She knew that, from now on, thousands of people would walk with more hope because she didn't bow her head. As she was leaving, a group of young people asked for advice. Dolores smiled. Never let anyone take your dignity. No matter what happens, always be yourselves. Respect starts within us. That night would be marked forever in the city, and the story of Delores Jordan traveled across the country, inspiring thousands of people to never remain silent in the face of injustice. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories of overcoming, justice, and hope. Share with someone who needs to believe that dignity can change the world. Until next time.